High on Life. This is one of the most polarizing games I've ever tried to review, and I'm sure this video in the comment section below is going to reflect that. As has been said 1,000 times on the internet so far, this is a game that you will either love or hate. The comedic stylings of Justin Roiland are polarizing. Either people really think it's hilarious, or they find it to be some of the most annoying garbledy-gook that's ever been put on screen. If you're not familiar, he has a very unique way of talking. There's also a ton of ad-libbing, so instead of just being like, oh, I'm gonna pick up my phone, there we go. He's gonna be like, oh man, I need to geez, pick up my phone. Oh man, this is easier than I thought it would be. And it just turns every little event into a massive one. But what I personally find most entertaining about his comedic style is that he commits to each and every bit fully, and so do the characters. What I mean is that when you come across an alien who seems to be wearing a trench coat and offering to sell you something, you might initially think he's offering you some sort of alien drug, but it turns out that he's selling alien genetic material, shall we say. Now, this is obviously absurd and kind of ridiculous, but instead of turning it into a joke, he just relies on the alien being very serious about selling you this gallon of alien ejaculate, and he just lets it play out and sees where it goes. And this type of comedy can lead you into some seriously strange situations, as you will find when you play High on Life. Now, it's not for everybody, as I said. Some people are gonna love this and others are going to absolutely hate it. And to be honest, that's okay. This is one of those games that's not for everybody, and you don't need to pretend as though it's for you just because you've seen that it's the #1 game on Game Pass right now, that it's blown past all of the expectations people had. Reviewers hated it, but gamers seem to love it. It's all over TikTok. Just because of those things doesn't mean that you are going to magically like it. It's the same exact thing that happened with Elden Ring. When people saw that that game was getting 10s out of 10s across the board, they thought it was amazing, as many people think it is, as do I. However, they just don't like FromSoft Soulsborne-like games, and so when they tried it, they didn't really have fun. They found it pretty miserable, and they didn't connect with it at all. And they were like, what happened? I thought this was a 10 out of 10, and I'm trying it, and I don't think it's a 10 out of 10 at all. I kind of hate it. And that's simply because people misunderstand the starting points or try to force themselves into a mold that they just don't fit in. The understanding is that if somebody is recommending you this game, they find the comedy styling funny, they find the writing to be funny, they find the world itself to be interesting. And if you're somebody who just doesn't feel that way after looking at some of the snippets and things that have been said about this game, that's not going to change while you play it. It's not going to grow on you. It's not really an acquired taste. So you just move on. But I'm guessing if you're still watching this video at this point, you either are somebody who likes this type of humor, or you're intrigued enough that you want to find out more about this game. And that's what we're gonna do today. Big thank you to Squanch Games for providing a review code for this. I got it just before the worldwide launch by like 8 to 10 hours. I don't remember exactly how long I had with it. Not really enough to play through the entire game before it came out, but I do appreciate the review code nonetheless. In this video, we're gonna do a rough and dirty rundown of the game's story and everything that happens within it, and we're also going to talk about a ton of the little side events that you can discover using warp crystals that you find throughout the levels. So if you haven't played it and you think you will, if you don't wanna have these little tidbits spoiled for you, then move on, come back to this video later. It will still be here. My feelings will not be hurt. The main goal for this video is to analyze what works and what doesn't, and then offer feedback that hopefully the developers can use in the development of a sequel, which I think is very likely to happen, especially after you see the secret ending that you can get if you finish the game and do a couple of extra tidbits here and there. I know for a fact at this point that at least one of the members of Squanch Games development team watches my stuff at least occasionally, so who knows, maybe your feedback in the comments will also get taken in and evaluated for the development of the sequel. You never know. I've had crazier things happen. Somebody made a recommendation for a gameplay change on my critique of Assassin's Creed Origins, and they ended up implementing that change into Assassin's Creed Valhalla because one of the developers saw that comment somebody had made and thought that actually makes a lot of sense. They messed with it, found that it worked, and then they put it in the game. So you never know. Those comments are not just going to waste. But okay, let's get into it. First, real quick, I just want to let you know I don't have a sponsor or anything for this video, so you're not gonna have to sit through all of that. But if you're interested, I do have a new merch line that we just launched on LukeStevensTV.com. Again, LukeStevensTV.com. And on here you have all of these shirts, hoodies, beanies embroidered with the logo, and even 16 times the detail items, which of course are themed around the famous Todd Howard quote of 16 times the detail. So if you would like a mug with 16 times the detail, you can get it. Again, LukeStevensTV.com. It's in the link tree as well in the description box, so if you want to check it out there, you can. But we ship worldwide. We have distribution centers, not just in Europe, but also Australia and the US. So if you want to get something like this, support the channel, and also get something really high quality and cool, you can do that. But okay, with all that said, let's get into it. Now, the game opens up with you playing Buck Thunder 2 Xeno Slaughter. Fun fact, the game for some reason installs to a folder when you install it through Steam called Oregon. I don't actually know why that is. If you do, let me know in the comment section below. But I kind of freaked out when I initially got the review code. I installed it and I saw that the review code was for a game called Oregon. And I installed it and then it boots up to Buck Thunder 2 Xeno Slaughter, and I was like, oh my god, they sent me the wrong game. They sent me some knockoff indie game. This is weird. And then I realized, oh no, this might be part of it, and sure enough it was. But it's just funny that happened. I figured it's a cool behind the scenes look at how these reviews go up. I've had a couple of games that I've reviewed which have code names associated with them, so you'll get access to the Omega branch, and then you boot it up and it's an early access version of the next Assassin's Creed game or something. But I haven't had a game that installs to a dedicated folder that's mislabeled. I don't think ever, but who knows, maybe I just didn't notice it. But either way, I thought it was kind of interesting and funny. They boot up to Buck Thunder 2 Xeno Slaughter, and the file folder is Oregon for some reason, and so if you are a little bit out of it, you might think that you booted up the wrong game, but it's all part of it. Here you quickly select your difficulty. You have the option between story mode, normal mode, and hunter mode. In my experimentation, this mainly deals with how much damage enemies deploy to you. I haven't noticed a huge difference in what damage you deal out, so as far as I can tell, it's mainly having to do with the damage multiplier that enemies get. We'll talk more about gameplay in the next coming sections, but I don't think that it's really necessary to play on hard mode, and I didn't feel like there was a lot of benefit. You guys know me, I love recommending to play on hard mode because it can often force you to use every tool at your disposal while playing, but often in High on Life, I felt like the higher difficulties just became more frustrating than fun, but that's my personal opinion. The game opens up with Buck's divorce attorney giving him instructions on how to move and navigate the level, effectively the first tutorial of the game. This is your first taste of Justin Roiland's humor, just having the tutorial giver be the divorce attorney of the character. It's really random and weird, but you know what? I found it very funny. You push into an arena, fight a bunch of your ex-wife's boyfriends who are swarming you, and eventually the camera will slowly pan out from the TV screen that you're playing on, at which point it will pivot to the left after you pause it, and you'll be greeted by your sister. She delivers some quick exposition, basically that your parents are gone and that she's ready to party. On a mirror that she pulls out, she has an illicit substance laid out on it, and then this also serves as the character selector screen. This, as far as I can tell, is completely useless because it doesn't have an impact on either the dialogue or anything that happens in the game because you're always wearing equipment, helmets, suits, everything else. So I don't really know what this is supposed to do, but you know what? I guess it's a thing that happens. Not even the dialogue changes because all of the characters use gender neutral pronouns when referring to you. So even when you're right there, all of the characters will be like, they are doing a great job. They've been great at hunting down these aliens and doing all this. They'll never use any gender specific language, as far as I can tell, regardless of whether you pick a male avatar or a female appearing avatar, it doesn't matter. I initially found the voice actress for the sister pretty grating and it was difficult to listen to, but as the game went on, I felt like she settled into her role more and more, and it started to feel like she gained confidence and that the dialogue wasn't delivered as unnaturally. Later on in the game, she starts to do some pretty funny things, and that's when I actually started to really enjoy her company and her presence in the game's story, though I do think that her presence here is an acquired taste. Outside of the house, you get your first look at the aliens you're going to be hunting down over the course of the game. The big guy in the middle is Garmantuous, and he is the head honcho that's running the show. They're speaking some sort of alien dialect, and there's some sort of dispute that happens shortly after Garmantuous eats an old man who is seemingly senile, who approaches him. The alien closest to you is shot dead, and you start to hear some sort of alien voice scream out from underneath him. The big alien ship then warps away, cutting a perfect sphere in the ground in the house next door, which for the record, I actually thought looked super, super cool. The fact that it just warps a perfect sphere out around it. You can see the cutout of the house that it kind of sat into. I just find it really, really cool. I thought this was awesome. But you go over, you pull out the little blue fella. He spits a bunch of green goop on you, which is how they explain that you then learn to understand him, because this possessed some sort of translator something or other. And then you remove an inhibitor chip, which seemingly limited his capacity to act against the will of his captors. So now he is with you, helping you do whatever you need to do. The next little tidbit serves as another combat tutorial where you fight your first few waves of alien enemies. There are these basic grunts that have one big eyeball up top, and then some more complicated and tougher guys which have varied movesets and more powerful weapons. They're all covered in this yellow goopy armor, which is something that will come back into focus later when the player is tasked with gaining their own armor in a similar way that ends up being pretty ridiculous. I really like this introduction. I feel like the grunt enemies, while easy enough to beat up with a bunch of shots, they can also be one-shotted if the round happens to land right on their eyeball. The yellow goopy armor is also something that you can shoot off of the big guys, so if you land a few shots directly to their head, they'll be able to get tapped out pretty quick. The game is super responsive, and also I think it looks pretty good. While your sister I don't think looks the greatest, I do think that all of the work they did on the guns, the aliens, and everything else is pretty remarkable. The game definitely has its own unique art style, but I found it to be one that's expertly executed. You rush back inside the house, you see your sister has beat to death another alien as they've continued to swarm. Over the next few minutes, you'll see a news broadcast on the TV in the family room that explains that aliens are basically invading the entire planet, and you'll use a warp device that you took from the big ship at the end of the road, and you'll warp your entire house to another planet. This place is called Blim City, and it is actually pretty gorgeous. There's all sorts of stuff to find here, and in true Metroidvania style, there are multiple areas that you can't access just yet. You're gonna have to come back with later abilities to find all of the cool tidbits in every nook and cranny. You're instructed by your new gun friend Kenny that you need to find a bounty hunter that can help you take down this alien enterprise that's taken over your planet. It's a little suspicious how he knows exactly what to do and who these guys are, but you know what? It seems as though he was with them for an extended period of time before this, at least before the person who was carrying him before was killed. So you can kind of excuse it as just having overheard all of the information about the aliens' plans and knowing their weaknesses and what needs to be done to conquer them. The bounty hunter he instructs you to find ends up being a homeless man that is far past his prime. He's pretty outrageous, disgusting, and also funny, but he hooks you up with a suit that will guide you throughout the game. In a pretty funny bit here, they also set it up so you have to constantly close pop-up ads because the suit is in trial version and it hasn't had a license redeemed for it. So until you get the license, you have to constantly deal with these pop-ups. I don't know this for a fact. I have not experimented to try and find out, but I think it would be really, really funny if people who pirated this game had this happen where it just never stops with the pop-ups and the entire game you have to deal with the pop-ups coming up constantly and constantly. I think that would be super, super funny. Of course, I haven't pirated the game. I don't really have an interest in pirating the game, but I think it would be hilarious if they ended up doing that in order to kind of get back at people. It's the same thing like you've seen it with other games where they set it up so like certain boss fights can't be done right or certain things happen in the game and glitch out if you pirate the game. And so you end up with all these people going onto Reddit and being like, what happened? I'm stuck at this level. It's glitching out or something. And it's a glitch that only happens if you pirate the game. So they end up kind of revealing themselves as a pirate. I find it really, really funny when they do that. And this seems like a golden opportunity to do the same thing. But to get your suit taken care of, you need to run all the way up to Mr. Keep's local pawn shop, where you will also be purchasing a bunch of little expansion items, power-ups, and upgrades for your suit throughout the game. You're going to be buying these items using pesos, the in-game currency. And while some of them are quite useful, such as increasing the eventual jetpack capacity that you'll have, and also upgrading your max health, even sometimes having weapon augmentation so that your guns fire in different ways, all of them are great. However, I found that there weren't as many upgrades as I was expecting. The guns all felt pretty bland at the end of the day based on their initial configuration. And I didn't really feel like it was necessary to buy a bunch of these upgrades and alternative methods of firing for your guns. There are a couple of guns we'll get later where you certainly benefit from some of the upgrades, but I don't think it's totally necessary. Again, maybe on higher difficulties, they become really, really useful, but on normal and the story mode, I don't think it's necessary at all. So I would have liked to see more variability and also more access to these earlier on. There's a section in the game in the last third or so of the main story where you're going to be kind of sprinting from story beat to story beat to story beat, and you won't have the chance to shop around for upgrades as much as you would think. And I think that that's also something that could have been improved, because at that point, you're going to start to bank up a lot of in-game currency, probably well over 10, possibly even over 20,000, depending on how much side stuff you're doing as well while exploring levels. And you just end up sitting on it until right before the end of the game, when you also get access to an even bigger, more powerful weapon that completely invalidates the usefulness of all of the others. So it's just not balanced super well. It kind of makes me feel like maybe there were sections that were cut, or that sections of the story were tightened up to make it carry faster along the narrative. I really don't know. I'm not sure, but all I know is that it doesn't feel as though you get as many opportunities to upgrade these guns as you should. But basically now the stage is set. You've made a deal with Gene that he can live in your house and that he can have it if you happen to die on your journey to defeat all of the local heads of this new G3 cartel, which is trying to take over Earth in order to use humans as the newest drug of choice for their alien customers. Get it? High on life? High, like drugs. They're getting high on human life. Get it? Yeah, see, it's funny. It's clever. He and your sister actually have some really funny dialogue bouncing off of each other for the first half of the game or so. And while Gene initially is pretty annoying, by the end of the game, you'll probably learn to love him. I know I sure did. While you were out, he set up the Bounty 5000, which is the tool that you're going to be using to warp to all of your bounty contracts and the different areas within the game. Here, you'll select each bounty from the list available, and then you can walk through the door to pursue them. The most agency you really get here in this game is usually three options. You can either explore areas you've already been to freely, or you can pursue one of two bounty contracts that are available to you at any given time. For this first mission, you only have access to one bounty contract, but as the game goes on, they'll start to offer them to you in pairs. I think this is something that would be really interesting to see expanded in a sequel, especially with a larger map and more zones and areas to explore, where they really do give you a list of a ton of bosses, possibly even dynamically generated, so that there are just constant opportunities to go fight, level up, get currency, do all of this. I think it could be really, really interesting. And the fact that they give you a machine like this to just freely pick which bounty contract you want to pursue makes me think perhaps they initially envisioned you just getting access to all of them up front, then you can choose which one you want to pursue. But you know what? 2 at a time is fine. Your first mission is to take down somebody named Torg. This is a weird bug-like alien which is controlling the local slums. On your way to the slums, you'll meet 2 little characters that are guarding the doors that give you access to the slums. One's blue and one's red, and you have to pick which one is more attractive. They both try to plead and make their case to you. It's completely up to you. It doesn't matter which one you pick, but it's just ridiculous and funny. Further down the tunnel, you also get confronted by a kid who tries to convince you to shoot him. For the record, the kid's 30 years old, so he's not like a kid. His mom you run into right after this, and she explains that he's 30 years old, but that he really annoys the crap out of her, so if you choose to kill him, she won't be that upset. It's just ridiculous and outrageous. It's just funny. Whether or not you let the kid go, you push on through into the slums, and you'll start fighting your first few waves of these ant-like enemies. The first hour or so of this game really does chug along, and I feel like they could have paced it a little bit better, perhaps with some bigger set pieces and things, but it's not the end of the world. While on your way to Torg, you also need to go by a laundromat, which has a knife in it, which is apparently an old friend of Gene's. And this guy is totally insane. He basically begs to stab people constantly. He's outrageous, and is actually one of the more fun characters in the game. But I do wish we got to see him more, because he kind of just sits in your pocket and rarely says anything. He also doubles as a grappling hook, which you can use to swing around levels really, really quickly, and I actually think it feels really good. As weird as it is, I kind of wish we got more platforming in this game. I feel like it's actually pretty robust in terms of mechanics that are offered here, but we don't often get challenged with it as much as I would have liked to have seen. As the game goes on and you start to access areas that are more hidden using different abilities, you'll get to do some more platforming. But even then, usually it's like a couple of platforms above a bed of spikes or some sort of toxic waste. it's not really that difficult or engaging. It's just kind of like, okay, well, it's a thing. These zip lines you'll be going on as well are also pretty fun, but I will say I really don't like the animation that plays out for this. It's super shaky, and it made me always think that I was glitching off of the zip line just ever so slightly. But apparently this is how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to look like this. This isn't a bug or a glitch. This is a conscious decision by the devs. I just don't think that it's very good looking. I don't personally like it, and I would have preferred if it came out a little smoother, but maybe that's just me. Now, it's also in this area after you get knifey that you'll discover just how utterly stupid a lot of the AI is. This area right here is a tremendous example where there's an army of ants coming down this ramp, but something about their AI and how it's been built doesn't allow them to engage in combat until they've passed a certain threshold, which means that if you run up this ramp, they will run straight past you until they reach the bottom of the ramp, at which point they'll turn around and start shooting at you. It feels really, really weird, and I could only imagine it's an artifact of how the AI is built out, that they only go into an aggressive phase once they pass a certain threshold, which is really unfortunate because there are some arenas later in the game where you can really exploit this artifact of the game's AI. It is few and far between. It's not a super common occurrence, but once you spot it, you won't be able to unsee it. But regardless, soon we arrive at 9 Torg. This boss fight was actually shown off in some early access previews of the game and some gameplay footage that I believe IGN and GameSpot put out. It's pretty straightforward. It's not a very difficult boss fight. It's basically trying to encourage you to use the different levels and height using Knifey's grapple hook ability, and then to also use the glob shot that Kenny can put out, which blows the enemies up into the air. Once they've been popped into the air, you can juggle them, and you can actually do some pretty massive damage pretty quickly. It's probably in this first section of the game that you will start to remember what a lot of reviewers said about the game, which was specifically that the gameplay is extremely lackluster. The gunplay is boring and uninteresting and really not worth your time. And I'll be real, this was one of those moments where I really just didn't understand what they were talking about. I don't know what they were looking for or what they expected, but I actually found this boss fight to be pretty engaging, and at times it can even be fairly difficult. Not to mention, every time 9 Torg pops up out of the toxic goo in the floor, it destroys one of the panels on the ground, which constantly changes the arena that you're fighting in. I don't know if these reviewers were just hoping to have like Modern Warfare 2, but in the format of an alien boss fight. I really don't know. I just don't understand what they're talking about here. I thought that this was actually quite well done. Don't get me wrong, there are issues later on in the game, and I do think that they start to rely on some copy and pasting within the minutia of levels and going through waves and waves of enemies, and I do agree that that's lackluster, but these boss fights are a real highlight. Eventually you kill her and you get to take a sample from her body. You need this in order to prove that you actually killed her, and so once you do this, another character lowers down. This character is named 5 Torg. It's apparently a sibling of 9 Torg, also evil and crazy, but she says that she's gonna take over and run the slums now. Funnily enough, you can actually kill her if you want while she's hanging here. You just shoot her or stab her repeatedly, and then a boss fight will trigger. She won't fight back or anything. She'll just hang there and let you beat her up, and her health bar will steadily decline. Eventually, once she's dead, Kenny will actually congratulate you on beating a super secret boss fight that probably wasn't found by a lot of other people, which I just find funny. There's no achievements associated with this. You don't get any sort of special gift or equipment or payout or anything. It's just something you can do. It doesn't even have an effect on the story where like 5 Torg takes over if you don't kill her, and then boss fights or enemies in this area later will be more difficult. Nothing like that. She just is gone, and that's it. I think it's presumed that she's probably hanging here throughout the entire story if you don't happen to kill her. So it's just a nothing burger, but nonetheless, it's kind of funny. After this, we've completed our first bounty contract. We race all the way back to the house and speak to Jean, which kicks off the events of the main game. Over the course of the next 6 to 8 hours, you're going to be traveling to all different biomes, areas, fighting off handfuls of enemies, waves and waves of them, in fact, and you'll be taking on multiple bounties to eliminate the leadership of the G3 cartel. These bosses include Krubis, Douglas, Scarandel, Dr. Giblets, Nipulon, and Garmantuous. Along the way, you'll also get access to a handful of different guns and characters, namely Kenny, Knifey, Gus, Sweezy, Creature, and Let's Do It. These each have their own unique personality, with Knifey being out of his mind, Kenny being probably the most normal of all of them, Gus being bombastic and ridiculous, Sweezy being very, very sassy and not giving a crap what you think ever, and Creature actually being pretty lifeless in his presentation. It's funny because Creature is actually one of the guns that is most unique. He can generate these little creatures that can jump out and swarm enemies and stuff. It's actually a pretty cool idea, and I was hoping they would do something with his character where he's like, you know, a really obsessive helicopter parent or something, like he's just constantly looking at them or yelling at them to do certain things when you like shoot them out and generate them. But no, he just kind of sits there. I think it's because he's a late game addition, and so they didn't feel the need to really write a ton of dialogue for him talking to the player. And so he's just kind of there, but you know what? It's whatever. At least they thought of a way out of this with Let's Do It. I would say this guy is definitely the most powerful gun that you get access to, or sorry. Gatlian. They're Gatlians. It's an alien race. It's not a gun. It's a species that's, you know, got these abilities. So yeah, Gatlians. But it turns out that this guy was actually the leader of the rebellion for Gatlis back on their home planet when it was initially invaded by the G3 cartel. When you find him, he's in pretty rough shape and it doesn't look like he's all there. And after Gene fixes him up, he's still pretty busted and he can only scream out, "Let's do it," every time that he wants to say something, which is just funny. It's like I Am Groot, but it's a gun. Unfortunately, you only get access to this guy for a little bit, basically for the last mission, and then you lose access to him for the end game section of the title. And it's a little underwhelming, but I get it. Like, the guy is just totally overpowered. And I mean, just look at some of these last waves of enemies you'll be taking on at the end of the game. I mean, he just cleans up. If you were able to carry him around these levels while doing side content and finishing up the warp drive discs and stuff, there would be no challenge at all. You also meet a bunch of other little characters, such as the Moplets, which are little like bear Teletubby looking creatures. They're just ridiculous and outrageous. They've been enslaved by the G3 cartel and primarily Krubis himself, which is one of your bounties. And you'll also run into other characters such as Klug, who's the local mayor of Blim City and actually helps you hunt down some of the G3 cartel members by giving you their locations. This guy's going to be important later when we talk about the secret ending, but just for now, remember he's a politician. He needs your help rounding up and clearing out the G3 cartel. He says it's because if you're able to clear out the G3 cartel when he's running for re-election, that's going to look better because he like cleaned up the city. So it makes sense. You help him out and he helps you out. It's a symbiotic relationship. As you explore various levels, characters will also send you little text messages that pop up on screen that you can read, and it helps you know what's going on back at the house or going on with other characters as you're completing these bounty contracts. Like this one, where Lizzie, your sister, tells you that she's dating an alien and that they're in love and they're going to run away. One of the more entertaining narrative things that goes on during High on Life is that Gene and Lizzie are constantly arguing, and eventually Gene starts to act kind of like the big brother to Lizzie and starts trying to offer her relationship advice for her relationship with this kind of sleazy alien that she starts going out with. And eventually you even like travel and warp to her boyfriend's minivan bus thing that they're driving around space in. And they're just having arguments, and it turns out her boyfriend's just a total dick, so you end up rescuing her and saving her. It's just like totally outrageous and silly and stupid. And it's these moments that really like endear me towards not just Lizzie, but also Gene himself. I just find these moments to be very, very cute and sweet, and also just like maybe not necessary in the context of a game like this. If you read the description of the game on paper, you wouldn't think sections like this would be necessary. But I do think it really adds to the lore of the universe and the characters, and I think it's really well done. I mean, there's even a section later on where Kenny needs to talk to you and have like a serious talk with you about what's going on, because what it turns out happened is that he was actually somewhat responsible, sort of, kind of, possibly, with the whole destruction of his planet and in turn his entire species, which of course the other guns, when he tells them, they're not too thrilled about. It's also why he's worried when he sees Let's Do It for the first time, because Let's Do It was the leader of the rebellion against the G3 cartel that Kenny kind of went on to help overthrow the entire planet and conquer them. But in order to have this serious conversation with you where he's like opening up his heart and soul as a little gun, you go to Space Applebee's. And then, like, you just sit there and order appetizers and food, and they're constantly making little comments like, wow, the food's really good here. It's just like, it's so outrageous. You just go and you find a space Applebee's, and it's just there. And you better believe that the developers and writers were sitting around a table and like, so they need to have this conversation. What like, where should they go to have this conversation? Maybe like a moon. Maybe they sit on a moon together and look at the sun rising or something. Like, no, what if they just went to like Applebee's? Like, where do you have a tough conversation with somebody? Like when you're breaking up with them or something, you go to Applebee's. What if there's just space Applebee's and they're like, yes, I love it. I just think that sort of irreverent humor is so refreshing. The game doesn't take itself very seriously, and it's like, yeah, space Applebee's, and it kind of implies that Applebee's themselves are like an intergalactic franchise. I love it. It's so funny to me. But beyond the very touching moments in Applebee's, some of the most memorable sections of the game for me were, like I said, the boss fights. Probably the most difficult one for me was this Brotron boss fight against the different Screndrel characters. Basically, it's a trio, and they each have their own different AoE and particle effect attacks that they can lay at you. It's pretty tough, and it gets extremely chaotic, and I actually found this to be really, really fun while also extremely challenging. I will say though that this boss fight really solidified for me the idea that Kenny is far and away the most useful gun that you have access to. Not only is he just straightforward and simple, being able to fire basic shots forward and then glob shots, you can later get like different upgrades and abilities so that he can start to fire basically spread shot glob shots instead of just one big goop ball. But all told, he's very robust, very reliable, simple, and relatively easy to use, whereas the other guns really feel like they're specialized and don't come in handy as often as you would think. Knifey requires you to get up super close and personal, which for some boss fights and enemy types is just not frankly practical. Gus primarily is used as a shotgun, which is great for getting up close with some bigger enemies, but frankly, you're often swarmed by so many at a time that it's just easier to use Kenny and try to land headshots. His ultimate ability is to launch out a big disc, which can be useful for navigating different levels where you can lodge that disc into the wall and climb up it. But in combat, I didn't actually find it any more useful than just using a spread shot glob shot from Kenny. Sweezy's interesting, and she can be used to slow time, which is helpful for some more hectic moments in gameplay and also for some traversal when you need access to quickly moving objects in order to get across big expanses, for example. And her basic attack is effectively the same as that gun in Halo, the Needler or whatever, where you can shoot them out and then they explode after the fact, except with her, you have to manually detonate them. There are upgrades you can get for her later on where you don't have to hit the same spot where a needle basically went into the enemy. You can instead just aim down sight, go ADS, and then shoot it, and then they'll deploy and things like that, which make her a little bit more useful. But again, I didn't feel like the damage output was any higher than it would have been to just use Kenny and land headshots. And I know what you're thinking, oh, Luke, well, landing headshots isn't actually that easy. I mean, you're just kind of assuming that you can just quickly and effortlessly land headshots. But the thing is, because you're usually swarmed by many enemies at the same time, and because enemy variety is so poor, often you just have to set the gun at the right height and then strafe left and right as you just spam the fire button, and you'll just land headshot after headshot after headshot and take them all out very, very quickly. Which I guess is a great time to mention enemy variety because it's pretty lackluster. As I said, the boss fights are the real highlight. I really think they did a great job with each of these bounty contracts. However, the enemies that they sprinkle the levels with that you have to push through on the way to the bounty contracts are actually pretty boring in comparison. There's some big brutes that they introduce towards the end of the game, specifically when you go to this big sort of sauna place where aliens are eating and doing like human drugs and stuff. And those big guys are interesting and are a little tougher to fight, but they just feel like basically bullet sponges. They don't really feel challenging or requiring you to really think through movement any differently. It's just a bigger enemy. And then all of the other smaller grunts and brutes that you fought throughout the entire game are just going to keep coming at you in waves after waves after waves, and it's never going to get any more interesting than that. This is one place where I totally agree with the broader consensus of reviews, which is that towards the end of the game, it certainly can start to feel pretty repetitive because you're going to fight waves and waves and waves and waves of the same enemies time and time and time and time again. You guys know me, I really don't like arena type shooters where they just move you into a room, you fight tons of enemies, and then you move to the next room and you fight tons of enemies. I don't really find it to be that engaging, but honestly, I think that they balance it out enough with the outrageous settings, the bizarre writing and characters, so much so that I think that it actually works when all is said and done, mostly because the game doesn't overstay its welcome, most likely, but still nonetheless, as far as the gameplay experience is concerned, I think it gets the job done. But now this is one of the moments where I actually want to pause and just reflect on everything that we've said thus far, because often what I'll find when I'm like reviewing or critiquing games is that what I've described basically just comes down to one simple fix that could be broadly applied to, say, a sequel that would address all my concerns and end up in the game being awesome and me not really having that many things to say about it negatively. It'd just be awesome. And in the case of High on Life, all of the critiques and things we've been throwing out mainly tie back into one simple thing, one simple effect that has impacted the whole development of the game. And that seems to be scope. Scope, in other words, just meaning the budget, how much stuff they were able to do, and the amount of time that they were given to do it. You see, this is an indie game technically. Squanch Games is a small studio. It's not a big AAA studio. They have very limited budgets. They can't just do whatever they want. They can't spend 5-6 years working on one video game that costs millions upon millions upon millions of dollars and just going crazy with every little small detail. They don't have that capacity. So they have to pick their battles, decide on 3-4 levels, build those out, decide on like 6-7 boss fights, do those, some guns. Okay, we'll do those. And they just have to get going with that. They can't spend years adding all of this extra variety on top of it. And that's why a lot of the time these games end up being shorter. They could inflate the gameplay time to like 20, 30, 40 hours, just require you, okay, to progress, you need to buy this flux capacitor for our device so that we can travel to the next realm for the next bounty. But you need 30,000 pesos. And in order to do those, you have to go around and complete side activities, which dynamically generate. And then you go off and you grind those, and that will lengthen the game time, certainly. But they don't do that because that will actually harm the gameplay experience. It'll start to make the game feel like it's being spread too thin because it frankly would be spread too thin. And so in that case, you would hope that if the game's longer, what's in those longer sections is more variety, higher production value, big budget set pieces and boss fights and things, and certainly variability of gameplay, especially in the form of enemy variety and different zones and things that you'll be experiencing. And so as frustrating, I guess, as it is, my biggest complaint about High on Life is that I want more of it. Like I want a bigger budget version. I want them to just be able to go balls to the walls crazy with the sequel. And that requires money, and that requires time, and time requires money, and time is money. So it all comes down to money. But the great thing is that with High on Life being so successful, in fact, while recording this video, I just got a pop-up on one of my phones saying, like a Google article that appeared, and it said that Minecraft has officially been dethroned by High on Life in like the last 20 minutes of me recording this video as the top Game Pass game. That's crazy. That's insane. So with that level of success, I have to imagine that every publisher on the planet, every big company like Xbox and everybody else, they're going to be approaching Squanch Games and trying to buy out the rights to the sequel, or at the very least to host the sequel. I would guess Xbox Game Pass gets access to it, especially because it's found success on Game Pass. And at that point, if Xbox does approach them and say, hey, we will write you a blank check to do whatever you want for the sequel, just get it out in the next like 3 years, they're going to do it. And that, I think, addresses almost all of my concerns. Because at the end of the day, I really don't have the same problems that some of these reviewers had when they gave it like a 3 or 4 out of 10. A lot of them, it seemed, complained about lacking enemy variety, which I can agree on. They complained that the comedy they didn't think was very funny, and they thought as a result it just carried on too long and it just was not super fun for them. And that primarily is due to their starting point of just simply not liking this comedic style, this style of writing. They were never going to like the game, just to be perfectly honest. And frankly, I think that lies more on the shoulders of the editorial staff and the editors of these big publications that put these people on these games to review a game like High on Life, because they were never gonna like it. It would be like putting somebody who only plays Mario Kart and those types of racing games and then assigning him to review Elden Ring. His review's probably not going to be that great. He's going to be like, it's really hard and I hate it and it sucks and it's not colorful enough and it's not cute. And he's going to have a bad time with it. But that's going to surprise nobody because that guy just was never going to like the game. It's not for him. But if you put people who like this kind of comedy, like this kind of writing and this just outrageous, unique approach to video game design, they're going to freaking love it. And I think that's what we've seen with these reviews. So I guess the summary of all of that rambling is just that I think they are uniquely set up to have a very successful sequel. And I am very, very excited for it because I think Xbox is going to basically write them a blank check to do whatever they need to do. And that means that we're going to get High on Life, but in the scope and scale that we all want. And I can't wait for it. But speaking of that, let's touch on some endgame content, specifically that secret ending. Now, in order to get access to the secret ending, you need to, of course, first finish the game. Then you need to travel through the portal section on the Bounty 5000 to Nova Sanctus. Specifically, you need to go to Clug's office, that politician and the local mayor who previously helped you take down members of the G3. His office will be empty, but inside is a Human Haven key card, which will give you access to the Human Haven where you've been transporting all of the people that you saved, like in the area where there was that spa that all of the aliens were sitting in and basically absorbing humans. So then you go back to the Bounty 5000, head to the unknown sector, and inside of that, you will gain access to the Human Haven. Once you go there, you'll use the jetpack that you unlocked along the way and slowly climb your way up this big shaft. At the very top, you'll use that key card to gain access to a secret passageway, and after working through some tunnels, you'll find a bunch of humans laid out on these beds that have been dissected. It seems like that Human Haven that you were given access to in order to protect human lives is not actually a haven at all. It's a housing for what are effectively just guinea pigs to experiment on. Eventually you find Clug and he runs away from you, and after you chase him, you're put into a sort of paralyzation sphere while a big scary scientist man talks to Mr. Clug. And this is one of the coolest moments in the game. It's just a badass looking set piece with the entire freaking planet behind you destroyed and glowing red. It's just a cool looking thing. The doctor seems to be done dealing with Clug and shoots him dead on the floor with blood slowly pooling out from underneath him. This man introduces himself as Dr. Gurgula, and he delivers a typical bad guy speech that sets up a sequel, saying that he was the one behind all of this all along. He manipulated Clug into getting you to take out the G3, which was his last big obstacle to getting access to humans, and those humans actually hold one of the secrets to the universe he needs to discover, and then he teleports out. This of course sets up a pretty badass sequel that I think is going to be really interesting. And it also just made me happy that before the game even launched, they were feeling good enough about this game and the lore within it, the characters and everything else, that they were like, we could do a sequel. Let's do it. Because as far as I'm aware, I'm not sure, but I don't think Squanch Games has done a sequel before. I think they've always bounced between new projects. So the fact that they like this one enough that they want to pursue another thing is pretty cool. But after this, you're set up to continue on through some more side content. This will primarily consist of you running around and grabbing those warp crystals throughout the game's map and different areas, and then using those to purchase these warp discs, which you'll be able to use to gain access to special little vignettes and cool events in the world. Probably my favorite of these is the trolley problem item that you can discover, and this one is just really outrageous and funny. It's, it's a classic trolley problem of 5 people tied to one railroad track and then one person tied to the other, and the train is slowly approaching and you have to pick if you're going to get involved for one, and if you are going to get involved, which track are you going to point the train in the direction of? Do you kill the 5 people, including, the one guy who openly loves genocide as he describes to you, or do you turn it and you only kill the one guy who seems like a really good guy? What do? It's really confusing, but it's just funny because they were like, yeah, what if we just took this outrageous, stupid thing and we just used it to apply a really interesting ethical question to the player? And sure enough, they do. I just find it funny. Grinding these warp crystals out is a little tedious, I'll be real. A lot of people, I think, are going to just look up on YouTube places to basically farm them, which you can sort of do. I'll let you look it up if you're interested, but I don't like it when endgame content is tied up in grinding and farming and stuff. I criticize God of War 2018 for forcing you to go through all of those missed deco sequences in order to grind up your gear and so that you could take on the Valkyrie without dying instantly. And I'm going to criticize it here. I just don't like when endgame activities and events are tied up in the most monotonous content. I find it annoying. But I mean, all told, there's so many hilarious moments throughout this game. Like I mentioned earlier, the random kid coming up to you and daring you to shoot him, and then his mom being like, well, thanks. I mean, I probably am pretty sad, but that was kind of a bummer, but also thanks because he was really annoying. Or the alien that runs the goop machine. You know, he's a goop guy. I'm a goop guy. And he is in charge of gooping people with this big creature that's going to basically poop on you to cover you in the goop armor so that you can get into secret areas and disguise yourself. Or the whole secondary story arc of Lizzie dating this alien who's a jerk to her, and then Jean sort of treating her like his younger sister and trying to help her and snap her out of it and make her realize she's worth more. It's just freaking hilarious. There's so many good moments all throughout this game, and I love it dearly. I mean, there's also that whole section where you go and you work in an office filing paperwork with the little like Teletubby looking bears. And while you're doing it, you're just listening to their office gossip, and the two characters who were like previously in a relationship talk awkwardly to each other, trying to figure out if they could work it out. It's just so funny. And I love it. But let's wrap all of this up because I'm filming this before Christmas and I'm trying to like tidy everything up so that me and Jacob, my editor, can take some time off for the new year and everything. All told, I think High on Life is great. And I think it really perfectly exemplifies what a great first entry in a new franchise can be. It sets the stage, it's unique, it separates itself from the competition in a really tremendous way, and it's also found inordinate success among a pretty devoted community and fan base. While I don't fault reviewers who felt like this game just didn't connect with them and that they didn't have fun with, I do think that the reviewers, on the whole, were wrong. I think that this game is not a 6 out of 10. I think that this game, for people who enjoy this kind of humor, is easily like an 8.5 out of 10. It's a game that's really good, that they will love, and that's certainly going to be one of the most memorable titles that they play within the next 2-3 years. I think it's really going to stand out in people's memory long term. Is it perfect? No, there's a ton of stuff they could do to make it even better come the sequel, and they know that too. But you know what? I think it's time that we stop pretending as though every release needs to be a 10 out of 10 or a 9.5 out of 10 to be worth playing. That's just not the case. Like, not every game needs to be the next Elden Ring or the next God of War or the next Last of Us Part 2 or something. You can have games which are worth playing that are still like solid 8s out of 10s. They're really good. They're not amazing, not life-changing, but they're good and they will entertain you and they're worth the time. And frankly, I've said this before and I'll say it 1,000 times more. Game Pass has just changed the equation when we are reviewing stuff, because normally we would have to evaluate quality versus cost and present that basically in a sort of weirdly worded formula for you to evaluate. Like, this game is this good for $70. It's up to you as to whether or not that makes sense for you, if that equation works out based on how much that $70 is worth to you based on your economic standpoint, everything else, right? And that's basically how we still have to do it for PlayStation games, because PlayStation games don't come to Game Pass, certainly. They don't go to PlayStation Plus on day one, even. And so it's a straightforward equation of, okay, $70 for the game. Is it worth it? We can figure that out and then make a recommendation based off of that. If people already have Game Pass as a subscription, that math fundamentally changes. It's just different now, because instead of me having to be like, well, the game's good, but I don't think it's worth full price. I think you should wait for like a $40, sale, get it around there. Then I think it's worth it. That equation doesn't matter anymore because it's on Game Pass. You can just try it and you won't have to pay anything else for it on top. And that's why games like High on Life probably would have been pretty floppish. I don't think they would have done very well if they only released on Steam and Xbox and PlayStation for like $60-$70. But with Game Pass, they're given the opportunity to explode because players can effectively treat it almost like a demo, like back in the day. They can just try the game, and if they love it, awesome. they have a new favorite game. And if they hate it, that's okay. They didn't lose any extra money. It's just a game they downloaded and now they'll delete it and move on. And I think that's beautiful. It's one of the reasons why I've said so many times that Xbox is just in another league when it comes to pro consumer offerings right now to their customers. I like PlayStation. I own 2 PlayStation 5s. I get all the fancy controllers. I love this stuff. I love their games. However, I'm not blind to the reality that PlayStation is just not able to compete when it comes to unique games like this on their platform. And if it wasn't for Game Pass, a game like High on Life probably wouldn't have stood much of a chance in the modern marketplace. Who knows, maybe this will be another nail in the coffin trying to push Sony into creating an actual competitor to Game Pass, because frankly, right now they don't have one. I know you're gonna say, well, PlayStation Plus, they have like, PlayStation Classics available. You're right, they have some 2015 and 2014 games that you can get included free. Awesome, good for them. I love it. But all of the major titles that they're charging $70 for from everyday people, they're going to force you to buy that fully. And then maybe 2 years from now, after it's released on PC for another $70 each unit, they're going to then bring it to the PlayStation Plus Premium, Ultra Plus, Max, Pro Max, whatever kit they call it, and then force you to pay 15, 20, 25 bucks a month for it. It's just not consumer friendly. It's not pro consumer, and I think to pretend as though it is laughable. Xbox is far and away the best offering right now for players, and without it we wouldn't get games like High on Life, and we certainly wouldn't get the sequel to High on Life, which I'm sure is coming down the pike. But all told, I'm very excited for High on Life 2. All they have to do is what they did in this game, but give me more of it and more varied versions of it, and I will be a very, very happy camper, as will many, many other people, I'm sure. So here's to one of the biggest surprises of 2022 to close out the year. I did not expect to love this game so much, and I certainly did not expect it to become such a phenomenon that it overtook Minecraft on Game Pass. But you know what? Some games surprise you, and High on Life is just one such game. So cheers to Squanch Games. I'm looking forward to the next one. But with that, I'm gonna go on a little vacation. You're seeing this after the vacation's ended, so I'm actually back when this video goes live. It's kind of trippy, it's weird, but I'm going to go relax, have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Hopefully you had a wonderful Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. I hope, hopefully, depending on when you're watching this. This is getting trippy and meta. I love you all. I'll see you in the next one. Hugs and kisses. Make sure again to subscribe for any new content. Ring the bell as well. It actually does help. And as always, you can also follow me on all of my social media. My Twitter is actually one I've been putting a little bit more effort into recently. I'm trying to force myself to tweet every day. So if you follow me over there, I would greatly appreciate it. But with that, I love you all very, very much. Hugs and kisses. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.